So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome and introduction. I believe I've met all of you at this point, but just again, my name is Jessica Hernandez. I'm the Director of Operations here at supplybank.org. With that, I oversee our warehousing, logistics, and procurement. So the trainings that I've been conducting have really been focusing on those aspects of the 3DRP program. So as you may have seen upon entering the training today, today's session is being recorded and will be posted on ACF's website within the next 2 weeks. They have been a little bit faster with that on some past trainings, but I would say 2 weeks is a good benchmark. And so as always, feel free to drop questions in the chat, and then we'll also have some opportunity for questions throughout the presentation as they arise. So looking at today's agenda, we're going to kind of discuss centralized versus decentralized procurement and how to go about doing a cost analysis model to determine which option is right for your organization. So we'll kick it off with centralized procurement. So as was kind of already discussed, centralized procurement is when procurement decisions are made by one organization or department. So it's really the process in which that organization or department is responsible for all procurement related decisions. So that's, finding vendors, vetting vendors, placing purchase orders, arranging deliveries, et cetera, all really runs through one department or organization. So an example of this would be grant recipients in the 3DRP program, where they have one grant recipient who is responsible kind of for all procurement for the entire state would be considered centralized procurement. Or if you are an organization that is doing procurement for, a few subset of grantees, but you just have one department that's really focused on procurement, that could also be considered an example of centralized procurement. So is anyone on the call currently using or plans to use kind of a centralized procurement model? Or we'll talk about what decentralized means, but I'm just curious if anyone here is planning or is already using this model.
Well, this is Janet with Williamsburg, Jameson County Community Action Agency.
Yes.
I think we are using that model because we have, hopefully, everything work out. We got one centralized location. Our partner will be doing the order for us.
Got it. Great. Anyone else? If not, we'll kind of move on. Great. So with any, program where you have multiple options, there are both pros and cons. So kind of running through what some of the pros for centralized procurement are, you have, generally better budgeting because all costs are handled by one entity. You're able to use economies of scale, increasing our purchase power, like we talked about a little bit earlier, because you're pooling your purchasing power from, potentially multiple departments or multiple agencies to hopefully achieve a better price point. You're also likely to see improved compliance and standardization of processes. With this, it's because instead of having multiple subrecipients kind of setting up their own relationships or multiple departments setting up their own relationships, everything's managed by one entity and is standardized by that entity. Additionally, with that, you'll kind of see the centralization of data and information management, as well as the centralization of any, environmental, sustainable, initiatives your program or organization chooses to put in place. You'll also see improved risk management. So kind of similar to the previous item, you'll see increased risk mitigation because you're able to streamline and standardize your processes. And you won't have to worry about managing and understanding the roles of multiple stakeholders within centralized procurement because you're really only working with that one, either procurement department or procurement agency. Additionally, you do tend to see increased relationship management with vendors because you have one organization that's really owning those relationships and working with them on a daily, weekly, et cetera basis. And then finally, you do tend to see a reduce in overheads and staffing costs because you have procurement centralized either in one department or one agency, as opposed to multiple agencies having their own procurement departments that are then working on procuring diapers and other related supplies. With that, we do have some cons as well. So, you can run into issues with potential of misunderstanding local requirements when you have one entity doing procurement for the entire state. So, an organization that's located in a large urban area, such as, maybe Richmond, Des Moines, Columbia, Raleigh, just kind of picking some larger cities in our states here, may not understand some of the unique challenges of the more rural partners involved in this program, and may not be able to properly articulate those to a vendor or another partner and able to, set everyone up for success. Additionally, there is going to be a created delay of delivery of inventory to distribution sites. This is likely to be because with kind of a centralized procurement model, you're also looking at having centralized warehousing. So you're likely going to have your deliveries made to one location and then have to, from there, kind of split the product out to multiple locations. So this will increase the amount of time it takes to actually get product to your distribution sites. And then finally, kind of along those same lines, time. So depending upon your agency or your statewide program's current setup and how many, different diaper banks you're partnering with, different procurement entities that might be working on this project right now, it could definitely take some time to kind of transition to a centralized process and be able to really get that set up well, compared to if you're currently working in more of a decentralized model. So kind of before moving on to a little bit about what decentralized is and what that looks like, I just wanted to see if there were any questions about centralized procurement and how it relates to this project. Great. I'm going to take the silence and the lack of chatter to mean no questions at this point. Again, feel free to drop them in the chat if you do think of any. So, like I said, next we're looking at kind of decentralized procurement. So, decentralized procurement is when each business unit is responsible for its own purchases. So, a business unit could be considered a department within an organization. So, if your organization has, a finance, a programs, communications, policy, different departments, and each one of those is responsible for their own procurement of materials, that would be considered decentralized. Similarly, within a program such as the 3DRP program, if you have multiple subrecipients doing their own procurement, that could also be considered a decentralized model because you might have 4 or 5 different organizations actually purchasing diapers on their own and then supplying them to their communities, as opposed to having one kind of like central procurement agency that is then providing all of the diapers to everyone who's participating in the program. So before we move on to the pros and cons, does anyone maybe offhand have a pro or con that they would be willing to share as it relates to decentralized procurement? Definitely, yeah, a bit, Christian, thank you for that. And an ability to tailor to local needs. We'll talk about that a bit, but that's definitely one with decentralized. Any other thoughts or feedback? Great. So moving on to the actual pros and cons. So potential for vendor diversity and the use of local alternatives. So different organizations might opt to work with different vendors and have access to local alternatives, such as a local grocery store chain or distributor that other partners might not have access to. Faster decisions based on regional needs. So, kind of both of these points go to what Christian from Virginia was saying in terms of being able to really tailor your program and your procurement to the needs of your local community. With this, you're also able to set up direct deliveries to distribution sites, and thus able to get products out to the community likely on a faster timeline. And then having a deeper understanding of specific community needs and the ability to respond. When doing a decentralized model, you may find that a specific organization is only really serving newborns and newborns with sensitive skin. And so they're going to have a different product need than another site that's really focused on older kids. And so, maybe looking at more of size 5s or 6s, and may not need those sensitive skin diapers. And so that's kind of some diversity in the products that you may need and what that would look like for your program. So some kind of cons when it comes to decentralized, that there's, less oversight on spending. So for those of you that are a part of the main state agency that is overseeing the 3DRP program within your state, you're kind of responsible for overseeing spending of your sub recipients. So by allowing different organizations to do their own procurement, you will have less oversight into their spending and need to collect more information from them to understand their costs. So it is, potentially creating a situation for you where you're ultimately building a little bit more work for yourself. Um, Similarly, you're not likely going to be using economies of scale if you have different organizations doing their own procurement, because you're really only procuring diapers for a small subset of your entire program. And so you are potentially losing out on cost savings and benefits. Along those same lines, you risk the potential duplication of vendors. So there is the scenario like we just discussed in pros where you might have a diversity of vendors and different agencies are working with different people. You could also have the flip side where everyone's working with the same vendor, but you're all procuring individually, thus kind of missing out on an opportunity for cost savings. Next, at that point, you then are looking at multiple procurement processes, a potential lack of transparency in terms of what those processes look like. And then you do potentially set yourself up for increased risk. I know we're still in the first 6 to 8 months of this program, but thinking about inventory redundancy and eventually as we're wrapping up at the end of 2 years, when you have individual sites doing their own procurement, you could potentially run into a situation where at the end of the program, everyone has a little bit of extra inventory on site that then needs to be distributed. While if you're doing centralized procurement, that's all kind of located in one space. So before we kind of move on to looking at what cost analysis potentially looks like, any questions related to a decentralized model? Great. I'm once again going to take the lack of silence and lack of chat to mean we have no questions at this point and go ahead and move on. So with that, thinking about cost analysis. So we're going to kind of take a broad look at a cost analysis and how you would determine what procurement model makes most sense for your organization. Realistically, in order to kind of conduct a cost analysis model, you do want to have, 6 to 12 months of actual expenses. So, potentially this is not something that you're able to do right now since we're only, a few months into this program. A lot of sites are still, getting set up, starting distributions, et cetera. But this is something potentially at the end of 2023, December, maybe January of 2024, you might be able to look at and see what it means for your current program. And if you might be wanting to make some changes, or, if you're happy with the status quo and just thinking about what it would look like once we kind of exit the pilot stage. So there isn't a perfect template for this type of analysis, what you're really doing is collecting data from all of your different partners around their costs and what their spend is, and then doing some data analysis with this of your partners' data and looking at the ways in which they're spending to make sure you're being the most cost effective. So that being said, I don't necessarily have a perfect Excel template to give you all because you're going to have data coming in different forms and different formats from your partners. That being said, we have done some of this work in the past here at Supply Bank and would be happy to kind of brainstorm around what different data pieces look like from your partners and how we could potentially set that up to set you all up for success. So with that, what do you kind of need to be able to do a cost analysis model? So like I mentioned, ideally you're looking for spend history for at least 6 to 12 months. With that, you're going to want to know the items purchased, the vendors that they were purchased from, the quantity, and then the individual item cost. So if you're currently operating a decentralized model, you'll need to collect this information from all of your procurement partners. That way you're able to kind of look at all of the different costs across the different organizations that are procuring. Um, and so then in addition to kind of that spend history, you'll also want to consider, if you're currently operating in a decentralized model and considering moving to a centralized model, you'll need to look at, number one, who would be operating that centralized model, and then number two, what additional, staffing or warehousing costs might that agency incur by moving to a centralized model. And then also additionally, you'll want to have price quotes from 2 to 3 vendors based on the entire programmatic volume. And so that'll kind of give you a baseline of what pricing would look like for a centralized model where you're procuring all of your diapers from one vendor, to be able to compare that to the pricing that your decentralized model currently has, by having individual entities doing their procurement. So there is kind of some research and fact finding involved in this process, outside of maybe how your procurement's currently running, to be able to understand what potential costs would be so you can do that comparison. And so what you're going to be looking for when you're actually doing this comparison, common vendors. So, if you are talking with your procurement partners or your individual sites that are doing procurement, and you have, let's say, 4 agencies that are doing procurement in your program, they send you all of the details about their products, their vendors, et cetera, and you discover that 3 of them are actually purchasing products from the same vendor. That's a huge opportunity to potentially centralize this process through either your agency or potentially one of those agencies, since they're all working with the same vendor already. Similarly, in addition to looking at vendor, you should also be looking at whether or not they're paying the same price for that item. There's a possibility that someone may have a larger volume already, or potentially have negotiated a better price that you might be able to leverage to apply to your other participants. So this is really an opportunity to kind of consolidate your volume and ask vendor around reduced pricing based off scale. There's also a situation where you might get this information and you see different vendors and different price points. So this might be an opportunity to consolidate around 1 or 2 vendors and perhaps see some decrease in price. But, there might be a reason for the different vendors. We could be looking at different types of diapers, um, cloth diapers versus disposable diapers, organic versus conventional. There's a lot of different reasons that you could potentially be seeing different prices for what, the same size diaper. And then just something to keep in mind with consolidating volume, while it's going to give you a better price point, you likely are going to have to consolidate delivery locations. So consolidating from, maybe 5 or 6 delivery locations that vendors are currently delivering to 1 or 2. And so that's obviously then going to result in additional deliveries to the distribution sites, and also present an opportunity where you may need additional storage space. So beyond kind of thinking about common vendors, you're also looking for common items. So understanding, is everyone just procuring diapers, wipes, and diaper rash cream? Are there other items that are being procured, by agencies for this program that maybe others aren't procuring? So you'll want to kind of identify those outliers and then follow up with sites to understand why those items are being purchased. So, what is the value there to their community? Is it something that could potentially be expanded, or is it really specific to their community and their community's needs? You also want to keep in mind when doing an item comparison that make sure to do an apples to apples comparison, not an apples to orange comparison. So kind of that's thinking about some of the items I mentioned earlier in terms of, organic versus conventional, or, cloth versus disposable. But also even within diaper sizing, you're likely to have different case counts. So one vendor might be selling a 100 count case, while another vendor might be selling a 200 count case. And so those prices are obviously initially going to seem very different, but you'll want to calculate down to the individual diaper or individual wipe price to really see how you're actually able to compare those items. Um, And then finally, like we've already talked about a little bit, looking for similarities and discrepancies in pricing. So just kind of keeping in mind that you may see some differences in pricing. This could potentially be due to volume or could be due to the type of product being purchased. Obviously, a diaper that is, certified organic and made from bamboo is going to be more expensive than kind of a conventional Target brand or Walmart brand diaper. And so you're definitely going to see some price differences there based off of materials and certifications. So kind of once you have all this information and you kind of looked through it, looking for these different items, you're then able really to see, number one, where's your opportunity for consolidation, but also know, number two, looking at all of your costs. And so if you have the spend of all of your partners around procurement, you're able to see what they've spent for the last 6 months compared to, all right, if we were to centralize this, what would our costs have been if we purchased diapers that were all shipped to one location? How much would that have cost us? How much would the additional potential warehousing and staffing have cost us? Additional equipment would that have cost us? And ultimately able to compare and see if you're able to, make a switch to a centralized procurement model, or is the decentralized model really working for your state and your program? And it makes sense to kind of continue with that and not make any changes at this time. So with that, kind of one final note before open discussion. So a big part of having a successful centralized program is that you need to have one either responsible department or organization. So in the case of this pilot program, that means either one of the diaper bank partners or potentially the main grant recipient needs to be willing and capable of taking on the procurement process for the entire state. So Arizona, who's not on the call, is one example of a state that's kind of operating within this model. They are partnering with one diaper bank in the state of Arizona who's providing diapers to all 11 of their CAA partners. So they're kind of already doing this model. But other states, you might find that, you're working with multiple diaper bank partners, but no one's really able to scale up yet. And they're really serving, the maximum amount of the community they're already able to serve. So it's definitely something to keep in mind in terms of looking at this and whether or not it's even feasible for you all to kind of think about switching to a centralized model within a pilot program. And then the last thing I did want to share is a journal article actually from the Journal of Purchasing and Supply Management. Christian will drop the link in the chat. It specifically talks about centralized procurement and the way it works within the public sector. It's a little dated because it was published in 2011, but it has some really interesting context and analysis about procurement work, particularly in the public sector, and what kind of a centralized model looks like. So if you have some time, I would highly encourage you all to check this out. I find it very applicable to the work that we do. And I think it would be a kind of a great tool and reading for everyone who's on this call to take a look at for what you all are thinking of doing as this program continues to progress. So with that, we'll kind of use the rest of this time for open discussion. So feel free to come off mute or drop questions in the chat if there's specific items they'd like to talk about a little bit further, whether that's kind of broad concepts or maybe specific concepts for your program or your state. And I will just say, if there aren't any specific questions, as mentioned at the beginning of the training, this is being recorded and will be posted on ACF's website within the next 2 weeks. Thank you all so much for your time. And as always, if you, don't have specific questions here, want to take some time to digest this information and then come back, feel free to reach out to Christian Browning on our team, and she's able to set up a time to have a, one-on-one or one-on-two conversation about this or any other topics. I do see. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say or ask because I know you all have been in operation for a while now, but
Yeah.
Did you start just partnering with diaper banks and then eventually got your own, or did you go to satellite sites first? Since I know you're in different parts of the state, or I guess that's more, how did you all grow?
Yeah. So we ourselves are a diaper bank. So we started
Yes.
kind of our program as a diaper bank. And so we
Okay.
didn't necessarily receive diapers from other diaper banks, but built our diaper bank program and grew it to serve all parts of the state of California. So we are operating a centralized procurement model with all of the product coming to being procured by our organization and then coming to our warehouse location and then distributing it throughout the state from there.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. And we definitely do, we're a member of the National Diaper Bank Network. And so, obviously different diaper banks around the state and the country. There's different programs that are, both successful in both of these models, depending upon what your state looks like and kind of how you're operating and providing diapers to the community. Marcus, given the state and region which an organization is located, which procurement model would you suggest? That's an interesting question. I think part of it, is particularly within this diaper distribution pilot. I would say part of it depends on how many diaper banks you're partnering with. In a case like Arizona, they're only partnering with one diaper bank. So that really lends itself to a centralized model because they have that one partner. But I know other states like South Carolina and Virginia, Iowa have multiple diaper bank partners. And so with that, you kind of lend yourself to a decentralized model, unless you're looking to have, what might be considered a somewhat tough conversation with a diaper bank, with some of your diaper bank partners to potentially consolidate under just one of them to be procuring all of your diapers. With that might not be realistic for a pilot program, but might be something to consider if this program continues to move forward, about what makes the most sense for your state and your region. Here for the program that we're operating in California, we definitely prefer the centralized model, even though we are a very large state landmass wise. But I think, at the end of the day, some of it does go back to your relationships. And while, you may have an opportunity for cost savings if you go with a true centralized procurement model, there is something to be said for including all of the diaper banks in your state in the program that you're running, even if it does mean you are spending a little bit more on diapers. Yeah, so I know that wasn't a direct answer, but I hope that's helpful context. And I think, at the end of the day, there's definitely something to be said for relationships and maintaining those relationships, even if it comes at the cost of a penny or two per diaper. Any other questions? If there aren't, feel free to hop off the call. Christian and I will be here for another few minutes if there's anything you'd like to chat about one-on-one. But if not, have a wonderful rest of your day.